The airport was quiet, until a little girl and her silent shadow stepped into gate A12. Moments later, she collapsed without a word. But what her dog did next stopped time, changed minds, and rewrote the rules. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The airport was unusually quiet that afternoon. Outside, rain tapped gently against the tall glass windows, making everything feel softer. A few distant announcements echoed through the terminal. Delays, gate changes, boarding calls, the usual background noise of travel. But at gate A12, everything felt different. The seats were half empty, the air smelled of damp concrete, and time seemed to move slower there. Then came the sound. Click, click, click. Not loud, but steady. Claws tapping against the tiled floor. A few people looked up. Some blinked in surprise. A little girl had entered the gate area, her hand tightly wrapped around the handle of a brown leather harness. Beside her walked a large Belgian Malinois, calm and focused, each step taken with quiet purpose. The girl, no more than 8 years old, had pale skin and dark circles under her eyes. She wore a soft gray hoodie, sleeves tugged over her fingers. Her name was Nina. She didn't look up. Her eyes stayed on the floor, her lips pressed into a straight line. But the dog, his name was Bruno, scanned the space with alert, watchful eyes. His thick fur was golden with streaks of black across his back. He walked close to Nina's side like a silent shadow. A woman, Nina's mother, followed a few steps behind, carrying a small backpack and a folded note from the doctor. She looked tired, like someone who hadn't truly rested in weeks. Worry sat behind her eyes, but she said nothing as they approached the gate desk. Mr. Denley, the gate agent, noticed them first. He was tall, wearing a blue blazer and a badge clipped to his chest. His eyebrows lifted when he saw Bruno. "Pets aren't allowed in the cabin," he said with a polite but firm tone. "You'll need to check him into cargo." Nina didn't react, but Bruno stopped walking. He lowered his head and nudged the small tag hanging from his collar. It was worn, the edges faded from time and use. The words were faint but still readable. "Medical service dog." Mr. Denley frowned. He looked at the dog, then at Nina. Her hands were twitching slightly, fingers pulling at her sleeve. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Before he could say more, the cockpit door opened. A man stepped out, Captain Reimer. His uniform was neat, shoes polished, face sharp and serious. The kind of man who followed every rule. His eyes landed on Bruno, then Nina. "What's this?" he asked, his voice deep. "That dog's not flying in my cabin, too big. He'll block the aisle." Nina's mother stepped forward, holding out the doctor's note. "He's her service dog," she said. "He detects seizures before they happen. He's trained." "Regulations are regulations," Captain Reimer interrupted. "Safety first, he's a risk." The mood at the gate changed. A man in a suit sighed loudly. A woman gathered her toddler onto her lap, eyeing the dog. Tension filled the air like a rising storm. Nina stood frozen. Her hand gripped Bruno's harness tighter. Her legs trembled slightly. Then Bruno moved. He sniffed the air, then pressed his nose urgently against Nina's leg. He let out a low whine. Her mother's face went pale. "Nina," she whispered. Nina blinked. Once. Twice. Then her knees buckled. She collapsed. A sharp gasp filled the terminal. Someone shouted. A suitcase toppled to the floor. But Bruno didn't panic. In one smooth motion, he moved beneath her, catching her fall with his body. His legs braced, his eyes sharp. 2 short, clear barks echoed through the gate. Not scared, not confused, but trained. Practiced. Ready. Phones came out. People stood. Some filmed. Others stared. Nina's mother dropped to her knees, calling her daughter's name. But Bruno stayed focused. He lay beside her, his body still, his head near her face. Officer Lin, a nearby airport security guard, rushed over, but paused when she saw the dog. He didn't growl or bark. He simply watched, his eyes locked on hers. guarding, waiting. Nina's small body shook. Her limbs twitched. Someone called for medical help. A few long seconds passed. Then paramedics arrived, led by a kind-faced man named Joel. He looked at Bruno, then at Nina. "Good boy," he said softly. "I see you're on duty." They approached carefully. Bruno allowed them through but stayed close. Nina's pulse was checked. An oxygen mask was placed. Her breathing slowed. Her fingers twitched. Her eyes fluttered. Then her hand moved toward the air, blindly searching. Bruno leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently against her cheek. Her lips moved, too soft to hear, but Bruno understood. The crowd remained silent. The man in the suit now looked down at his shoes. The woman holding her toddler had tears in her eyes. Captain Reimer stood near the edge of the gate. His arms, once crossed in control, hung at his sides now. His face had changed. The hardness was gone, replaced by something else, something softer. His first officer stepped beside him. "Sir," he said quietly, "we can't separate them, not now." A long pause. The sound of rain softened outside. Then Captain Reimer spoke. "Fine," he said. "He stays, at her feet, no exceptions." No one clapped. There was no applause, just a quiet understanding. In the air. A shared respect. And as Bruno lay beside Nina, his eyes never leaving hers, a story had already begun, one that no rulebook could write. A quiet hum returned to the terminal, broken only by soft footsteps and worried whispers. Nina lay still, her small frame curled against Bruno's side. Her mother knelt beside her, wiping sweat from Nina's brow, her fingers trembling. Bruno didn't move. His body was pressed close to Nina's, steady like stone. One paw rested, gently on her shoulder. His ears twitched, not from fear, but alertness. His chest rose and fell in calm rhythm. He was working, not as a pet, but as a partner. His brown eyes stayed fixed on Nina's face, reading every twitch, every breath. A crowd had gathered, but no one dared get too close. Ravi, a teenager with a travel backpack and a phone in hand, stood nearby. He had been watching from the start. When Nina collapsed, he began recording, not to shame but to remember. Something inside him said this moment mattered. Now, he kept filming, silently, capturing Bruno's quiet bravery. A voice came from the side. "Security's coming." Someone muttered. Officer Lynn arrived first, her boots clicking softly against the tile. She slowed when she saw Bruno. The big dog didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply looked at her, eyes calm but firm. Officer Lynn raised her hand slightly, showing she meant no harm. "Easy, boy," she whispered. "You're doing your job, huh?" Nina's mother looked up, eyes red. "He's protecting her," she said. "Please, just let him." Officer Lynn nodded, then stepped back to hold off the growing crowd. Some people had phones out, but no one spoke. The scene didn't need words. It spoke for itself. Then came the medics, 2 of them, pushing a stretcher and carrying medical kits. The lead medic was Joel, a man with soft eyes and calm hands. His partner, Mira, stayed a step behind. Joel approached slowly. "Hi there," he said to Bruno, crouching low. "You've done well, friend. Let's help her now." Bruno didn't move at first. He watched, waited. Then, sensing the change in Nina's breathing, he shifted slightly, allowing them in. He stayed close, never leaving her side. Mira placed a heart monitor on Nina's chest. Joel slipped the oxygen mask over her face. Nina's fingers twitched again. Her chest rose, then sank more evenly this time. Joel nodded. "She's stabilizing," Mira whispered. "It's the dog. He calmed her before we even got here." Joel smiled at Bruno. "I've seen a few like you," he said quietly. "But never one quite like this." Nearby, Captain Reimer stood still. He wasn't looking at his clipboard or checking the time. He was watching Nina. More than that, He was watching the way her body curled toward Bruno, the way the dog stayed still, gentle, full of purpose, passengers whispered. Someone said, "That dog's a hero." Someone else whispered, "How could they have said no?" Ravi kept recording, but his hands had stopped shaking. He wasn't filming for views anymore. He was filming because it felt like the world needed to see this. A girl, a dog, and a moment that changed everything. After a few more minutes, Nina's eyes fluttered open. Her mother gasped. "Nina?" she said softly. Nina blinked slowly. Her gaze didn't focus right away, but her hand reached out blindly. Bruno was there before anyone else. He pressed his head gently under her hand, letting her know he was still there. A quiet sigh escaped Nina's lips. A small sound, but it carried across the gate like music. Joel gave her a light nod. "She'll be okay," he said. Thanks to him. They helped Nina sit up slowly. She was pale, but conscious. Bruno stayed glued to her side, tail still, body calm. Captain Reimer stepped forward slowly like someone unsure of his place. He looked at Nina, then at Bruno. His voice, usually sharp, came out softer than expected. "We're preparing to board in 20 minutes, he said. "If she's cleared to fly?" Joel turned to him, speaking with quiet confidence. "She's cleared, but not without him." Captain Reimer paused, looked down, then nodded once. "He stays, at her feet." No argument followed, just agreement. As the crowd began to break apart, a woman nearby whispered, "I've never seen anything like it." A man behind her added, I think that dog just taught all of us something." Ravi stopped recording. He slipped his phone into his jacket and sat quietly, watching Nina as she slowly sipped water from a bottle her mother handed her. He had been planning to catch a different flight. Now he wasn't sure. Part of him wanted to stay on this journey. Something about it felt bigger than a destination. Nina looked up at Bruno and whispered something too soft to hear. The dog didn't move, but his eyes softened. He heard her. He always did. Soon, boarding was called. Passengers gathered their things, but something had shifted. They moved quieter now, gentler, like they'd witnessed something rare. Nina rose slowly, with help from her mother. Bruno stood at her side. Together they walked toward the boarding lane, a girl and her guardian ready to fly. No one tried to stop them. Nina walked slowly down the boarding ramp, one hand clutching her mother's fingers, the other resting gently on Bruno's harness. Behind them, the line of passengers moved quietly as if the usual rush to find seats had been replaced by something softer. Bruno moved with calm confidence, always staying close to Nina's side. Every few steps, he glanced up at her, checking, listening. The plane waited at the end of the ramp, its door open, the inside glowing with warm yellow light. A flight attendant named Lena greeted them with a kind smile. "Row 9, right side," she said gently. "We've made room for him." Nina gave a tiny nod. Her lips didn't move, but her eyes said thank you. Lena knelt down and scratched behind Bruno's ear. "Good job, buddy." They reached their seats. Nina slid into the window seat. Her mother sat beside her. Bruno curled up in front of Nina's legs, his body stretching just enough to fit. He rested his head on her feet like a soft, heavy blanket. Other passengers filed in. No one complained. A few smiled at Bruno. Some nodded, quietly at Nina. Others sat in silence, still thinking about what had happened at the gate. In seat 14B, a young woman named Sage settled into her seat. She had soft eyes and a photo tucked into the cover of her journal. It was her brother Liam. He had epilepsy. He had passed away 2 years ago. When she saw Nina and Bruno walk onto the plane, her heart stirred. The image brought back memories she hadn't touched in a long time. In the row ahead of her, an elderly man named Mr. Kassir adjusted his glasses and crossed his arms. Earlier, at the gate, he had sighed loudly when he saw the dog. Now, he sat, still eyes fixed on the aisle, quiet and unsure. The plane filled slowly. The engine started to hum. Captain Reimer's voice came over the speaker. "Welcome aboard. Flight time will be just over 2 hours. Please remain seated until we're in the air. His tone was steady, but those listening closely could hear something different in his voice, something thoughtful. As the plane rolled back from the gate, Nina placed a hand on Bruno's head. He responded with a small, comforting nudge. The world outside the window turned into clouds and rain. Takeoff came smoothly. The engines roared, but Nina didn't flinch. She pressed her face to the window, watching the ground grow smaller and smaller. Bruno stayed still, pressed close to her legs. 20 minutes later, the plane leveled out above the clouds. Nina relaxed a little. Her breathing evened. Her mother opened a book, but barely read a word. Her eyes kept drifting to her daughter and the dog who had saved her. Then the plane jolted, a sudden bump, not heavy but enough to shake a few cups and rattle some nerves. Sage tensed. Mr. Kassir grabbed his armrest. Nina's breath caught in her throat. Bruno felt it first. Her muscles tensed. Her fingers twitched. He rose to his feet in one smooth motion and pressed his body against her side. Her eyes fluttered. Her head leaned back against the seat. Bruno began his work. He pushed gently against her ribs, not forceful, just enough to remind her she was safe. He let out a soft sound, not a bark, just a breath of air through his nose. Nina responded. Her hand reached for him. She touched his head, her fingers weak but moving. Slowly, the stiffness in her body eased. Her mother leaned closer. "Breathe with him, Nina," she whispered. Nina tried. In, out, in, out. Bruno matched her rhythm. The plane steadied. In seat 14B, Sage wiped away a quiet tear. She remembered the way her brother had panicked during flights, how he had always wished he had someone like Bruno. Mr. Kassir watched Bruno. His eyes softened. The tightness in his shoulders faded. A flight attendant walked by, paused, and smiled gently at the pair. "He really is amazing," she said to Nina's mother. She nodded. "He's more than amazing. He's her anchor." Half an hour later, most passengers were either dozing or staring out their windows. But Nina was awake. Bruno's head rested on her lap and she traced slow lines through his fur with her fingers. She looked peaceful now. Her skin had color again. Her breaths were calm. Captain Reimer walked quietly down the aisle. He rarely left the cockpit mid-flight, but something had pulled him out this time. He stopped beside Nina's row and looked down. Nina met his eyes for the first time. He cleared his throat. His voice came softer than usual. "How are you feeling?" Nina didn't speak, but her mother answered, "She's better, thanks to him." Bruno looked up at the captain, his expression neutral but calm. Captain Reimer knelt beside them. "I wasn't sure before," he said, almost to himself. "But now I see." He didn't say much more, just gave Bruno a small nod and returned to the cockpit. The plane flew on, quiet and steady. Outside, the clouds began to part, revealing a golden sky. Inside, hearts were changing. What started as a conflict had become something else. A reminder of loyalty, of trust, of the quiet power love can carry, even 30,000 feet in the air. The plane began its slow descent. Outside the window, soft golden light touched the clouds. The sky had cleared, turning warm and peaceful, like it was welcoming them home. Passengers started to stir. Seatbelts clicked. Books closed. Quiet conversations filled the cabin. Nina remained still, her fingers gently resting on Bruno's back. He hadn't moved much in the last hour. He lay stretched across the floor in front of her, always touching, always watching. His body shifted only when she shifted. His head rose whenever her breath changed. Her mother looked at her and gave a soft smile. Nina returned it. Her face, which had been pale and tired at the beginning of the flight, now looked calm and full of quiet strength. In row 14, Sage closed her journal and slipped the photo of her brother back into her pocket. She looked toward Nina and Bruno once more, then leaned her head against the window with a smile on her lips. She felt lighter, like a piece of her heart had been gently put back in place. Mr. Kassir pulled out a pen and began writing something on a napkin. He paused several times, staring down the aisle, his eyes landing on Bruno. He had come onto the plane thinking he understood the rules. Now, he wasn't so sure. The wheels touched the ground with a soft thud. A few people clapped, but most simply smiled. It wasn't just the end of a flight. For many, it felt like the end of a lesson they hadn't known they needed. The aircraft rolled toward the gate, the sunset casting long shadows through the windows. It painted everything gold. The seats, the walls, even Bruno's fur. As the seatbelt sign turned off, people rose slowly. There was no rush. Nina waited. She sat quietly as the others began to gather their bags. Her mother helped her to her feet, and Bruno stood beside her. He stretched once, then turned to face the front, ready to lead. As they moved down the aisle, people stepped aside. Some nodded. Others whispered words Nina couldn't fully hear. Brave girl. Incredible dog. I'll never forget this. When they reached the front of the plane, Lena, the flight attendant, crouched down. Thank you both, she said to Nina and Bruno. You taught us something real today. Outside the plane, the world had turned soft and golden. The ground still held the scent of rain, and the lights along the runway blinked quietly in the distance. Just past the gate, Nina knelt beside Bruno. She wrapped her arms around his neck and rested her cheek against his fur. Good boy, she whispered. Bruno leaned into her. His eyes closed halfway. His tail gave a slow, gentle wag. Then, footsteps. Firm, measured. Captain Reimer approached. His hat was off, held in his hand. He looked less like a figure of authority and more like a man learning how to listen again. He stopped a few steps away, unsure. For a moment, he simply stood there watching. Then he knelt, slow, careful, like it had been a long time since he'd knelt for anything. He looked at Nina, then at Bruno. I was wrong, he said quietly, about him, about all of it. Bruno looked up. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just watched, then took a single step forward. He sniffed the captain's hand, then gently licked it. A small laugh escaped from Captain Reimer. It was soft and surprised. He blinked quickly and looked away for a second, wiping his cheek. Nina smiled. Her mother did too. There were no speeches, no big applause. Just a moment of truth, offered and accepted. A few weeks later, a video started to spread online. It showed Bruno catching Nina as she collapsed at the airport. It showed him barking to alert others, staying close to her, never leaving. The video had been filmed by Ravi, who had uploaded it without a title, just a simple line beneath it. Some heroes don't wear capes. The video went viral. People from around the world shared it. Messages poured in. Donations arrived for service dog training programs. Stories from families who had dogs like Bruno began to fill the comments. And Captain Reimer. He agreed to speak at a fundraiser for families who needed service animals. He didn't talk much about flying that day. Instead, he talked about learning to look again, really look, at people and at the bonds we often don't understand. Bruno became more than a dog to many. He became a symbol of quiet strength and love that didn't need words. But for Nina, he was still just Bruno, the dog who walked beside her, who guarded her sleep, who pressed his head against hers when the world became too loud. And every time she whispered, "Good boy," he wagged his tail once, as if to say, "I'm here, always."